Behind the scenes, and Lisa Owen is next with Checkpoint. Good afternoon.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere ake nei, we haven't peaked yet. 68 new community COVID cases today. The Delta cluster now sits at 277. We'll break it all down. Air New Zealand hits more turbulence with another year of massive losses in a level 4 lockdown. And remember, it had a separate, unrelated Delta case, while double vaccinated aircrew do not have to isolate at all. So if Delta is a game changer, should those rules change too? Pregnant and medical complications too, the desperate Kiwi who can't get into MIQ and is about to become an uninsured overstayer in the US. Relieved teens with NCEA and scholarship exams delayed by 2 weeks.
Ahi Mārie, RNZ News at 5, ko Sarah Thompson tōko ingoa. The Prime Minister has sought to temper any alarm after another large increase in COVID-19 in the community. 68 new cases were reported today, bringing the total size of the outbreak to 277. Jacinda Ardern says New Zealand was in a similar space to yesterday, which saw 62 new cases. She says that's not necessarily unexpected, given the more infectious Delta variant. Ms Ardern says even though the country moved into lockdown quickly, people should expect the impacts to be in the community for a time to come. Vaccination rates broke another record yesterday, with more than 87,000 people receiving a Pfizer dose. Of the nearly 500 locations of interest in the latest outbreak, only 13 have generated additional COVID-19 cases. There are another 20 locations of interest to report today, bringing the total number to 495. One is a rugby game at De La Salle in Mangere pre-lockdown and 2 more supermarkets post-lockdown. Jacinda Ardern says it's important to note only a handful of the nearly 500 locations of interest have generated new cases.
While we do have a large number of locations of interest, and we do want all of those individuals who are connected to those locations of interest to follow the health advice, at this stage roughly 13 have had cases transmitted at those locations of interest.
The government is asking that people regularly check the Locations of Interest website, which is updated every 2 hours. An employment lawyer is warning of court battles between companies and employees refusing to be vaccinated. Organisations that employ border workers are currently the only workforce that can enforce vaccinations as a condition of continued employment. Other jurisdictions have moved to mandate workforce vaccinations across the board, but the New Zealand government says it's not on its agenda. Employment law specialist Chris Scarrett says this will leave some employers in tricky situations.
For example, if you've got an immunocompromised worker who isn't able to get vaccinated and they're concerned about working alongside someone who isn't vaccinated but has no good reason, in their view, you need to look at whether there's measures you can take to protect them other than probably dismissing.
Chris Scarrett anticipates court cases where unvaccinated employees will argue they were unfairly dismissed. Many teenagers and principals are relieved the government postponed the start of NCEA and scholarship exams by 2 weeks. They say the delay will give about 150,000 students more time with their teachers preparing for exams. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The Education Ministry has told schools that due to the disruption to learning caused by the Level 4 lockdown, the exams will begin on November the 22nd. Teenagers contacted by RNZ had differing views on whether that was a good idea. One said the delay would help many students, but another said it would cut into study leave and disrupt plans for holiday work after exams finished. Principals told RNZ they backed the government's decision and they expected further changes to ensure young people were not disadvantaged if the lockdown continued.
The government is promising to come up with a plan for New Zealand citizens who they can't remove from Afghanistan in the current emergency airlift. An internationally agreed air bridge out of Kabul is set to close on Tuesday next week. It's been internationally reported that the Taliban have made a commitment to allow Western citizens and at-risk Afghans to leave the country after the deadline. But Otago University's Robert Patman says this can't be taken too seriously.
Although it indicated that it was a mellower form of the Taliban that had reappeared in 2021 than the one that disappeared in 2001, there seems to be a gap between their rhetoric and what they're actually doing on the ground.
New Zealand is no longer accepting applications from Afghan nationals for resettlement. It's 5:04. Moving now into sport, the All Blacks have selected just one first five in the initial 35-strong squad for the rest of the Rugby Championship and the end-of-year tour to the United States and Europe. With Richie Mo'unga staying home for the birth of his child, Beauden Barrett is the only number 10 in the group that leaves for Perth this evening. Sports editor Stephen Hewson reports.
Captain Sam Whitelock and veteran halfback Aaron Smith are also staying home and will link up with the team later due to the imminent arrivals of babies. Loose forward Shannon Frizzell, who was recently offered diversion on assault charges, has not been selected. The All Blacks will play the final Bledisloe Cup test in Perth next week before relocating to Queensland for 4 Rugby Championship games against the Springboks and Argentina. The team will be away for 3 months.
Swimmer Sophie Pascoe will chase her first gold medal of the Tokyo Paralympics when she competes in the final of the 100-metre breaststroke SB8 category later tonight. Pascoe posted the second quickest time in the heats, just 0.04 of a second slower than heat winner Ellen Keane of Ireland. Pascoe won silver at the 2012 Games in London. All-white striker Chris Wood has helped Burnley advance to the third round of English football's League Cup, slotting one of his side's goals in a 4-3 penalty shootout win over Newcastle. England will begin day 2 of the third cricket test against India at Headingley in a commanding position. The home side will resume on 120 for none, a 42-run lead. And that's the news.
Stress on quarantine hotels as infection rates grow.
We're really looking at an outbreak now that is similar to the one that we dealt with in March and April last year, which was of the order of 1,000 cases.
Officials consider COVID booster shots.
Over time, our immune response wanes. If it wanes low enough, then you're at risk of getting the disease again.
And putting on a brave face.
I've got a carefully chosen selection of books to make me look intelligent. I've got some art from the kids.
Zooming into your homes, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Rāmere Friday. For Northland, also Taranaki, partly cloudy today with the odd shower north of Taranaki. Periods of rain tomorrow, heavy at times. For Auckland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, mostly cloudy, scattered showers tomorrow, turning to rain in the afternoon or evening. For Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine today, scattered rain in Wairarapa tomorrow and high cloud elsewhere, with patchy late rain in Hawke's Bay. For Kapiti and Wellington, cloudy periods and 1 or 2 showers today, periods of rain tomorrow. For Buller, Nelson and Marlborough, showers turning to rain this evening with heavy falls. For Canterbury, Otago and Southland, cloud increasing and rain spreading north this afternoon and evening. Mostly cloudy with rain at times tomorrow. For Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain, heavy at times. And for the Chatham Islands, fine spells today, occasional rain or showers tomorrow. That concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Rāmere Friday. The time is 5:07.
Nā mihi Sarah, tēnā koutou katoa no mai haere mai ki checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The country's COVID cluster has had another big jump today, 68 new cases, bringing the total to 277. 263 are in Auckland and 14 are in Wellington. The two new Wellington cases are household contacts and have been in isolation throughout their infectious period. While the numbers may be big, the Prime Minister is trying to avoid any alarm as the government prepares to reveal its next moves to try and eliminate the virus. Our political editor Jane Patterson reports.
The Prime Minister says the numbers are still mounting up as expected, but the pattern shows the lockdown is working.
We haven't seen spread beyond Auckland and Wellington, where there is a known link to the Auckland outbreak. If it weren't for lockdown, I'm sure we would have seen cases spread. Lockdown is also having an impact on locations of interest. While our cases are continuing to grow, these locations of interest aren't continuing to grow exponentially alongside them.
And a flurry of interest today about a possible link between the original Australian returnee and the community outbreak, but that's now being described as unlikely. The returnee had been in managed isolation in the Crown Plaza before they tested positive and were moved to quarantine. Ms Ardern says there is a person connected to that hotel who had had contact with a positive case who'd been at a number of locations of interest early on.
The person has tested negative twice, and their entire household has also tested negative. So it's not something that we're canvassing widely because at the moment the evidence there isn't strong.
Ms Ardern was also asked about the increasing pressure on the availability of quarantine rooms. She says in some cases a whole household will have to isolate together, but in other cases can be housed separately to a family member in quarantine.
So we have an additional facility that was brought on to house household contacts in order to separate them. We're also bringing on another facility that will come online tomorrow in order to give us greater capacity. So whilst I can't give you some of the specifics of those numbers, I can tell you we are bringing extra facilities online.
While the outbreak continues to throw up new cases in Auckland and Wellington, wastewater testing is being used to pick up any undetected community transmission. Director of Public Health Carolyn McElnay says the virus was picked up in testing around Christchurch from samples taken on Saturday and Monday, but she says that can be accounted for.
That follows previous negative results last week, but ESR does stress that there are 3 active cases in Christchurch managed isolation facilities, and that is consistent with the virus being shedded from those cases. Further sampling from around Christchurch is being undertaken today, and we'll get those results by the end of the week.
There's been pressure on the government to lift lockdown in the South Island. As while there were more than 100 contacts from the outbreak, there have so far been no positive cases. Ms Ardern says that will be taken into account.
But we look for other measures, of course. We've got good rates of testing. What's the wastewater looking like? And are we confident that we can safely move in that area? Those decisions we'll use with the very latest data, and we'll be looking to make those decisions tomorrow.
Auckland will remain in level 4 until at least midnight Tuesday, with Cabinet making a decision about whether to extend or not on Monday.
An employment lawyer is warning of legal standoffs between companies and employees who refuse to be vaccinated for COVID-19. Employers can't legally require their staff to get vaccinated, but there's nothing stopping them adding those requirements into future employment contracts. The government says it's up to employers and employees to work out any disputes. Our political reporter Annika Smith has more.
At the moment, organisations that employ border workers are the only ones who can legally enforce vaccinations as a condition of continuing employment. Miss those deadlines, that's today for government border workers and the end of September for private border workers, and those workers may be out of a job. But what if you work outside the border? Does your employer get a say in whether you get the COVID-19 vaccine? The Minister for Workplace Relations and Safety, Michael Wood, says no.
Where it comes to existing employees, there is currently not a legal facility for employers to be able to require them to be vaccinated as a condition of maintaining their employment.
Mr Wood says the Health and Safety at Work Act is clear. It's up to employers to work with their employees to eliminate or manage health and safety risks.
That is quite a powerful and flexible tool for employers to be able to use to manage this situation.
National spokesperson for Workplace Relations, Scott Simpson, says that puts too much responsibility on businesses.
Wouldn't a reasonably practicable approach be to simply exclude from the workplace employees who choose, for whatever reason, not to be vaccinated? Isn't that something that employers should be able to rely on in terms of the legislation and also the situation we find ourselves in?
It's been done in some overseas jurisdictions, but Michael Wood says it's not on the government's agenda.
If we were to bring in a widespread power to that effect, that amounts to, for a large proportion of New Zealanders, a compulsory vaccination order. That is not something that the government has proposed.
Without government intervention, the Health and Safety at Work Act and employer-employee relations are the only tools in the toolbox when managing staff who refuse to be vaccinated. Chris Scarrett, a senior associate with employment specialists Cullen Law, says it may put employers in a tough spot.
For example, if you've got an immunocompromised worker who isn't able to get vaccinated and they're concerned about working alongside someone who isn't vaccinated but has no good reason, in their view, then that, you need to look at whether there's measures you can take to protect them other than probably dismissing.
Among measures short of dismissal are deployment to other parts of an organisation and continued health measures like mask use. But even with these, Chris Scarrett says things will inevitably spill into legal challenges.
I would be surprised if it doesn't. As much as our view might be that you can't mandate vaccination as an employer, someone's bound to try it. These sort of things happen with employment law, so I expect there will be something like that done and there will be a challenge to it.
For now, Michael Wood says it's up to employers and employees to come to their own agreements. He says anyone struggling to do so is asked to contact Employment New Zealand for advice and support.
Ho mai o whakaro, I'd love your feedback on that one. Nō reira anei nā kaupapa mo te hōtaka nei. How is it working at your workplace? What's the deal with those workers who are vaccinated and those who aren't? And what roles do you think vaccines should be compulsory for? Pātui mai, text me on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Air New Zealand's hit more turbulence with a $289 million loss for the year ended June, and it's used $350 million of the government's $1.5 billion loan facility. Add to that, the airline also recently had a crew member test positive for Delta after flying home from Japan. That case is totally separate from the current cluster. So I started with the money first and asked CEO Greg Foran how much cash Air New Zealand's burning in level 4.
We've actually suspended cash burn guidance at the moment, Lisa, and I think you can understand why it's just so difficult to predict. We had the Tasman going well. We were up 230% Rarotonga, so that was pretty good, and domestic was very strong. July was the best July that we've ever had. Now, of course, we're in a completely different and difficult situation. Waiting to see how long we're going to be in this situation. We haven't drawn down on the loan any more than what we had in February, so that still sits at a drawdown of $350 million. We've got over $1 billion worth of liquidity thanks to the Crown loan, and we'll just have to see how it plays out.
If the country is divided, with Auckland and the region being in a level 4 lockdown, how workable is that for you as an airline, and have you got a plan ready for that?
We do. We've been rehearsing it, and we've done it before because Auckland has been at a different level than the rest of the country. So we can operate that.
But at level 4, Greg, that's obviously a different kettle of fish. So what does that look like for you guys?
Well, level 4 for us across the country is just 7 flights, Lisa. So we're down to Wellington, a couple of times to Christchurch, Wellington to Nelson, into Dunedin, and that's about it under level 4. Now, when other areas go to 3, and let's say Auckland stays at level 4, that opens up a couple more flights for us. If part of the country goes to 2, that opens up some more. So it's a wonderful piece of network scheduling that the team have to do, but we can do it. The other thing we've done, I might add, is we've obviously applied for the wage subsidy. That'll help a bit. We've done that previously. I think we've had the benefit of about $10 billion of support on the wage subsidy over the last 18 months.
How much are you asking for this time?
The full amount. So that'll work out to be, I think from memory, probably around about $5 million a week.
$5 million a week?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We're a high-cost business. Airlines tend to be a lot of fixed costs, so, we'll do our best, but we'll just see how we work through over the next couple of months.
I want to return to the situation with your crew member who tested positive after coming back from Japan. Can you clarify the situation here? Returning crew from high-risk areas, as long as they are double vaccinated, they don't do anything, do they, in terms of isolation? They just go home. Is that right?
They do. That is correct. They do go home, and they then have to have a COVID test within a week.
Within a week? Within a week, Greg. We're dealing with Delta here, right? And we're constantly being told by the Prime Minister and medical professionals that Delta is far more infectious and in a shorter time frame. Is it time for those rules to change?
Well, we work pretty closely with the Ministry of Health on those, Lisa, and I think that over the last period of time, we've only had 4 crew that have contracted COVID. This, I believe, is the first one that's had Delta. I've actually spoken to this crew member a number of times over the last week, and they are in good spirits and in good shape.
Has it spread to anyone else, Greg?
No, it hasn't. And that's one of the beauties of vaccinations, is that it lessens that chance considerably. So all the other crew on 2 flights have been tested, and there has been no further transmission of that, Lisa. So, those are the conditions. I might add to you that my hat goes off to our crew who, for now 570 days, have been moving people and goods internationally. 4 cases. Obviously, we'd like there to be none, but they put up with a lot. They do a terrific job for New Zealand and New Zealanders during that time. We've brought back
and people will appreciate that, Greg, and they do appreciate it. But, that's just good luck, isn't it? Because with Delta, it only takes 1 case in order to spread widely. So I ask you again, in terms of that week time frame in which they have to have a test, well, could that even be shortened to make it more effective if they're not doing isolation?
When you consider all the flights we've done, Lisa, I don't think that's luck at all. I think it's good management. I think it's very good adherence to the policy by Air New Zealand pilots and cabin crew and people on the ground. I think they've done a terrific job.
There's always room for improvement, though, isn't there, Greg? There's always room for improvement. So we're dealing with Delta, and we're being told this is an absolute game changer, and the rules and the way we imagined it has changed completely. Far more contagious, incubation period much shorter. So would it not make sense for that testing regime to be altered accordingly, and even isolation to be altered accordingly for your crew, regardless of whether they're double vaccinated?
Well, that's something that can be discussed. What I can tell you is that with Delta, we have reviewed procedures again and upped the use of PPE, so improved the quality of the masks that the crew wear, and also provided plastic shields, and we've done that both domestically and internationally. And as I said, we're in constant touch with the right authorities and working this through and assessing the risks.
So is there any active discussion about altering those rules?
I'm not across any at the moment. There may well be, but I'm not personally across those.
Can you see how people, New Zealanders who are double vaccinated, who still have to isolate, will look at the situation with your crew and say, well, it just doesn't marry up. There's rules for some and rules for others.
Well, I guess one of the things we're seeing, Lisa, with this is that, situations change and rules change, and we're seeing that play out all around the world, in fact. And you're seeing countries now starting to open up, and you can go there providing you have been double vaccinated. I'm sure over time, as we get more and more New Zealanders vaccinated, what you'll start to see is some adjustments to some of the policies and rules. But, those are the rules in place at the moment, and that's what we apply, and we do that very diligently.
And that was Air New Zealand CEO Greg Foran. Let me know what you think of the aircrew rules. So if they come back from high-risk areas and double vaccinated, they do not have to isolate anywhere and just return a test within 5 days. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It is 24 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai. Thanks for listening. E haere ake nei calls for rapid COVID testing for essential workers, and the largest subcluster of this outbreak gets a dedicated testing centre. Essential workers and a top COVID expert are among a growing group calling for rapid COVID tests to help New Zealand get ahead of Delta. The highly contagious variant has meant thousands of contacts are isolating while waiting on lab results. But there's hope rapid tests could be the key to speeding up that process and easing some of the massive lockdown pressure. Anei te kairi poata, Anita Blake-Person.
More than 270 COVID cases and 24,000 COVID contacts. Delta's reach is like nothing we've ever seen before. Among those caught up in the outbreak, supermarket staff, cafe workers, medical professionals and aged care nurses.
We've got staff off waiting to get test results back, and we are clearly advised that, this is to do with getting those tests through the labs, the priority systems.
Dr Frances Hughes heads the nursing leadership group at the Aged Care Association. About 6,000 nurses work in her facilities and they're feeling the pressure with staff waiting to get the COVID all clear. But there's hope rapid COVID tests could help.
If we could do this for our frontline health workers and get those tests back and have a system that gets them back quicker and gets them back to work earlier, absolutely. It would be a great initiative.
Rapid antigen tests are widely used overseas. You swab your throat or nostrils and mix it on a special card, and kind of like a pregnancy test, it reveals a positive or negative result in about 20 minutes. Those making the kit say they catch people when they're most contagious.
So while somebody may have a positive PCR test, could be 20 days, could be 30 days, that they have an infection, but they may not be contagious to others. And so what this type of test actually does is it's really screening for people that have a viral load that is contagious or infectious to other people.
Daniel Newman is the president of Innova Medical Group, which has delivered about 1 billion rapid tests to the UK over the past 6 months. The UK is one of about 20 countries he's supplying, where he says it's helping society open up with more confidence.
They use the test to help keep schools open, to keep workplaces going, to be able to keep people that are working in enclosed environments that are critical infrastructure, police and fire. But now they've gained enough confidence with it that they're starting to use it to open up, say pubs, sporting events, concerts, things like that.
The fast turnaround relieves pressure on testing labs and means people aren't isolating unnecessarily. They're relatively cheap, less than $3 each in large volumes, and a recent independent study found they were 99.8% effective. While the FDA has yet to approve them in the United States, more countries are coming on board, and Newman is applying for Australian approval right now. He could get them here in under a week if given the green light.
There's inexpensive, highly accurate tests that can be widely deployed in New Zealand and other places that will, certainly help open up the economy.
Countdown is understood to be interested in using rapid tests to help protect its workforce, especially its distribution centres, and is approaching the government about how that might work. Auckland University COVID modeller Sean Hendy says they're a vital tool in our COVID fight.
We've already had reports of some essential workers catching the virus, so having the rapid testing in place would allow us to both keep our essential services operating at a higher level, but also would be able to do it more safely.
Because tests can be done so much more regularly, Hendy says it helps make up for any inaccuracy risks, and he wants the government to look at rolling them out as soon as possible.
If we had them widely available now, I think they'd be a very useful tool in combating Delta.
Today, the Director of Public Health, Carolyn McElnay, said they were looking into it.
Continue to look at the evidence around all sorts of testing, including rapid antigen tests. We haven't yet provided a conclusion. The evidence is emerging around the world about that, but we continue to keep a close eye on things.
While they would be welcome, they're not without their risks, and Dr. Francis Hughes said there would need to be clear protocols and processes.
Any tests that people are doing, it means we can get it early, keep people at home, give them clear direction and understanding, but we need those good communication systems. And who are they going to ring if it comes positive, and get the response? We can't have more stress in the system by, a great initiative, but not understanding the wider context.
For now, it looks likely to be a slow response to a potentially rapid boost to help combat COVID.
A lot of you getting in touch about which roles you think should have compulsory vaccination. Jason from Wellington's got in touch to say, I'm in the hospitality business. All my staff and all our customers to whom I have talked are strongly in favour of COVID vaccination for themselves and the benefit of everyone else. Another listener says any public-facing role should have the vaccine. There are very few people who legitimately can't have it. If you're choosing not to based on fears that aren't supported by evidence, that is not an informed decision, they say. Do the right thing, get the jab. It's got 10 ingredients and they're all perfectly safe. Eventually, we're all going to be exposed to COVID and we need this protection. He ahi o whakaaro, what do you reckon? Get in touch. Text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It is 29 minutes after 5. Kia mau tonu mai. You are listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Families mourning the loss of their loved ones are grappling with tighter restrictions on funerals and tangihanga, which prevent them from being present at any stage of the funeral process. Among them is the whānau of the late Ngāti Kahungunu Kaumātua, Des Rātama, who have placed their father's body in storage until Level 4 restrictions lift. During last year's Level 4 lockdown, people in the same isolation bubble as the deceased person were allowed to go to the funeral or urupa, but as Te Aniwa Hurihanganui reports, that's all changed.
Ngāti Kahungunu Kaumātua and staunch advocate for Māori rights, Des Rātama, died just 5 days into lockdown, devastating his whānau and the wider Hawke's Bay community. Whānau spokesperson Bill Gray says they are anxiously waiting for Level 4 restrictions to lift in order to give Des the send-off he deserves.
Our hands are tied. It's the government's directives that we can't do much. So we've accepted that. The family decided to put Des on ice for 14 days. After 14 days, we would review it. But I guess it doesn't stop us from using Zoom to remember those wonderful moments in time we spent with this honourable man.
Storing tū Papaku or the deceased is just one of many ways families are dealing with tighter Level 4 restrictions on tangihanga and funerals. Family and friends living in the same bubble as the deceased can no longer be at the funeral home or cemetery. For Māori, the rule change is particularly significant. Tangihanga are a sacred cultural tradition, often lasting several days. Mr Gray says the Rātima whānau feel heartbroken to have to mourn their father's death over Zoom.
I mean, it's foreign to Māoridom that one can use a phone to express their emotions and farewells to someone that was so dear and near to us.
The Ministry of Health said in a statement the rules have tightened due to the increased threat of the Delta variant. Viewings of the tūpapaku, dressing of loved ones or taking tūpapaku home are also not allowed. Donna McLeod from Motueka sympathises with families who are unable to be with their loved ones, having lost her father during last year's Level 4 lockdown.
We never expected him to pass away during lockdown, and he did. For us, that was very difficult because all our children, of course, aren't at home anymore. We're so much part of iwi, we're so much part of the marae, and so no one was able to come and to awhi us and manaki us and hold us.
Ms McLeod's father was allowed to be at home for a short time before he was cremated. Family and friends living nearby would walk past their home and perform karakia or say a tribute to him from the roadside. Others living afar shared memories online and streamed into Ms McLeod's living room from their computer screens.
There is nothing like being at a tangihanga and being with a whānau, but when we can no longer do that, we need to think, how can we still offer all those things, that awhi, that manaaki, and that is the hardest thing, and it's to use Facebook, to use Zooms, and I know it's not the same, but, this is where we're heading.
She says her father's send-off wasn't perfect, but her whānau did the best they could under the circumstances. She says that's all anyone mourning loved ones can do right now.
For me and my brothers, I guess that's the main thing. We've done the best that we could in this time. And I think that's what we have to remember as Māori whānau, as all of us really. The intention, we've done the best that we can in this time.
The Ministry of Health say guidelines for tangihanga were developed with trusted iwi leaders and experts across the sector.
E te iwi e haere aki nei I a checkpoint, the pregnant Kiwi with medical complications in dire need of an MIQ spot to avoid overstaying in the US. Less stress for students, NCEA exams are pushed back, and Paralympian Sophie Pascoe's #1 fan and Nan on nervously watching her gun for gold in Tokyo. Homai o whakaaro, love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme tonight. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time for the headlines now. Anei a Sarah Mina Pita Pita Kōrero.
Kia ora, Lisa. RNZ News headlines. Ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. The Prime Minister is standing by New Zealand's COVID-19 elimination strategy for now. She says the country's success will be judged not by the latest Delta outbreak, but by the total pandemic response. Jacinda Ardern says health experts agree elimination is still the best plan for now, but she's open to change in the future. 68 new cases of COVID-19 have been reported today. The outbreak total is 277 cases. Almost 42,000 tests were processed, while only 13 of nearly 500 locations of interest have generated additional cases. 87,000 were vaccinated, a new record. Calls are mounting for the use of rapid COVID-19 tests. The antigen tests get results in about 20 minutes. Auckland University COVID modeller Sean Hendy says they're a vital tool in getting ahead of Delta. A pregnant New Zealander with a medical condition that could put her and her unborn child at risk is stranded in America and uninsured after being declined an emergency MIQ spot 6 times. You can hear more on this story after these headlines. The head of Air New Zealand doesn't see any likelihood of a return to normal international travel for another couple of years. Chief Executive Greg Foran backs a COVID travel and vaccine passport, but thinks it is still some way away. The government is promising to come up with a plan for New Zealand citizens who they can't remove from Afghanistan in the current airlift. It's been internationally reported that the Taliban will allow Western citizens and at-risk Afghans to leave the country after August 31st. Otago University expert Robert Patman says this can't be taken too seriously. In sport, the All Blacks will fly out with a 35-player squad for Australia and the United States and Europe, but expectant fathers Sam Whitelock, Richie Mo'unga and Aaron Smith are staying home for now. The team will be away for 3 months. And can Paralympian superstar Sophie Pascoe win her 10th gold medal at what is her 4th Paralympics? We will find out tonight in the 100-metre SB8 breaststroke. Those are your headlines. Our next news and sport update is at 6.
No mai hoki mai ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hoa and nei ko Nona Peltier, who joins us to talk business. Nona, it's been a big day for company results. Give us a bit of a rundown of some of the highlights.
Well, in some cases it's a low light, I have to say. One of them is the specialty dairy company A2 Milk. No big surprise there. We've heard that they've had some trouble. And anyways, their profit definitely was down 80% to $80.7 million. The market didn't like that much. It dropped its share price there 11%. Genesis Energy, its full year profit is also down. That's because of higher costs of fuel, carbon fuel that is, as well as they had to pay out to $53 million following an unfavorable arbitration decision over a gas liability. But their share price wasn't down very much because the outlook is positive for the company. We also had the market operator, NZX. Its profit dropped 16%. It wasn't exactly clear on why, other than they'd spent more money on staff and higher tech costs as well as some fees. Anyways, the market dropped their share price down a couple of percent on that news. Tourism Holdings was another that had been hammered by the pandemic there. But, despite the loss that they reported, the market wasn't too disturbed by that, and that share price rose 1%. Comvita was a bright note as well. It delivered strong earnings growth at the top end of expectations, and the market liked that, up 4%. Let's see. Kiwi Bank is another. They more than doubled their profit from last year. Now, they're not a listed company, but definitely a very positive outlook for Kiwi Bank. So let's see what's left. Not much, I'd have to say. Overall, though, because of A2 Milk, the NZX Top 50 Index, it ended down 1%. That's a 122-point drop to 13,052. And the New Zealand dollar, well, it gained a little against the US dollar. It is currently trading at 69.5 US cents. Now, that's more US dollar story than it is a New Zealand dollar story there. 95.9 Australian and 50.6 pence. How's that for a big rundown?
Thank you, Nona. That was Nona Peltier with Business News. A pregnant Kiwi with a medical condition that could put her and her unborn child at risk is stranded and uninsured in America after being declined an emergency MIQ spot 6 times. And the window for her to fly home is closing fast as her pregnancy advances. Bergen Graham was living with her husband Oscar in his home country of El Salvador when she fell pregnant in February. Straight away, he applied for a New Zealand visa, but it was June by the time it was approved, and they couldn't get MIQ spots through the voucher system. To complicate things, Bergen's pregnancy is deemed high risk. 3 separate specialists have provided letters confirming that. Because of a blood condition, she requires medication and specialist monitoring. The couple's in the US now because Bergen Graham's visa for El Salvador was about to expire, forcing her to start the journey home without guaranteed MIQ.
Arriving in Los Angeles and only expecting to spend 4 days here and having everything organised to go back to New Zealand. Obviously being pregnant and knowing that I had a slightly complicated pregnancy and then finding out that I couldn't go back was just awful. And then I think the worst thing of all is not that I couldn't go back then and there, but with that, I didn't know when I could potentially go back. So we don't know how long we're going to be in Los Angeles for, which means that we haven't been able to sort out long-term accommodation, car rentals, setting up appointments. So every week we thought, or every sort of day for a while there, I thought, okay, tonight we'll get on the plane and go back, it'll be okay. And we couldn't. And so every day we were just trying to find new accommodation whilst being pregnant, while being in the city that we're not familiar with, or the healthcare system that we're not familiar with. Has been really stressful for us.
You have gone to Los Angeles because you were hoping to get closer to home and your visa was about to run out in El Salvador. Do you have health insurance, Bergen? What are the consequences of giving birth in America?
It's a big unknown here. It's because I can only go private. And private is obviously really expensive, or I can go to the emergency department. And if I go to the emergency department, I've got no idea what it can cost. We first looked into it when I first got here and sort of asked around what the likely costs were going to be. And we were told an average pregnancy around $20,000, but if there's complications, up to $100,000 is what we were told, which was just, at the time, extremely stressful. I think as well, because I was told that I had a pregnancy which required an obstetrician or led delivery, we knew straight away, okay, this is not a birth where I can go into a birthing centre and be aware of the costs. I need to be in a hospital. So.
In simple terms, what is your medical complication, and is that putting you and your baby at risk?
In simple terms, my medical complication is the fact that I'm Rh negative, my blood type, and my husband is Rh positive, which means that from what I understand and from what the information I've been told, is that during birth, there can be complications where my baby will reject my blood because my baby is Rh positive, and I therefore need treatment, or I need treatment, and my baby might need treatment, and we might be born anemic. That's sort of I guess that's what I understand to be the issue from.
So you have sought medical letters and you've made, I think, 6 applications to get a spot in MIQ, and every single one has been turned down. What do you think of that?
I mean, I think it's awful. I think it's dreadful. I think if I can't go back to New Zealand, then who can? I mean, they're sort of saying to me, it needs to be an emergency. And if my situation, I clearly need to go to a hospital to have a baby, and I don't have a visa to legally be here before the baby is born. And there's a certain point I can't travel anymore. And so if I don't meet that criteria, who does meet that criteria? And if they're saying to me, well, your issue isn't severe enough, if my issue was severe, if there was a significant complication with my pregnancy, by that time it would be too late. I couldn't board a flight and go home. I'd be stuck in a hospital here. And I think sort of not being able to talk to a person, or just getting these really general responses, which I've had every single time, which have sort of said, we don't believe there is a significant risk to your health, therefore we've declined this application, has been the most frustrating thing ever, because every time I go to an appointment here and I explain my situation, they'll sort of say to me, yep, that's shocking, we'll write you a letter, absolutely, you need to go home. And then I get the letter and then I submit it, and I still can't seem to get through to MIQ about what the issue is.
So I'm looking at a letter signed by an LA physician. It says, it goes without saying that my recommendations are clearly stated that she and her child is at serious risk from a medical perspective. What do you think when you hear those words?
Yeah, I think it's frightening. I mean, it's frightening if that's been ignored, you know, if a doctor has said to me here that you need care, you're a vulnerable person right now in your state, and my country that's supposed to be responsible for me, or that I belong to, doesn't seem to care, or doesn't seem to think that that's significant enough to let us in. I think, yeah, that's horrible.
So how far along in the pregnancy are you, Bergen, and how much longer can you actually fly for?
So they have passed 28 weeks now, so to fly I need medical clearance, and as long as everything goes smoothly from here on, I can fly up to 36 weeks.
So basically the clock is ticking down for you?
Yes.
And at the point that your child is born in America, if that is what happens, you will be an uninsured overstayer?
Yes. Exactly.
So where does that leave you?
Sitting here frightened, hoping that we can go back, or hoping that an option comes up. I think if New Zealand said to me, hey, you know what, there is no space for you now, but we will make space for you here, then at least we know, you know. But right now we're just being told no, no, no. Even if you meet the criteria, you might not be able to get in. Knowing that, okay, my situation might be after my baby's born, I'm here illegally, I've got a baby that I'm supposed to care for, but I'm also trying to get out of the country, and I don't have any permanent place to stay and no means to support myself. It's awful. It's frightening.
Bergen, some people will wonder why you went to El Salvador during a pandemic.
Yeah, and that is the question I get a lot. Like, I had an option. My husband couldn't come into the country. So my husband is from El Salvador. New Zealand obviously closed their borders. We were told for the partnership visa it was going to take, almost a year to go through. And we had to show that we had been living together for 12 months to be eligible for that. And so we knew straight away that, I wasn't going to sit in New Zealand and not see my husband for that amount of time. So the only option I had was to go back to El Salvador.
And that was Bergen Graham. Now, in a statement, the joint head of MIQ, Megan Main, says there is no guarantee that a person who fits within these categories will receive an emergency allocation, as it depends on the number of applicants and available cases, and time-critical situations need to be prioritised. It says in Bergen Graham's case, some of her applications were too far out from her travel time, and others were declined based on the evidence she provided. MIQ says it provided clear advice on the information and that she needed to give them, and that an independent medical professional must state her condition requires urgent travel to New Zealand. We'll have more on this story after 6. A treasured birthing centre in the Hutt Valley will be mothballed next month due to a lack of funding. Thousands signed a petition calling on the DHB to take over the running of the centre, which sits just down the road from the main hospital. But it wasn't enough to convince the DHB to stump up the cash. Anei te kairi poata Emma Hatton.
Hannah Dollery is a first-time mum and was looking forward to having her baby at Te Awa Kairangi.
Hospitals can seem, scary and massive and a bit intense, I think, especially when you're going into labour. So it was just really exciting to be able to have the option to birth it at Te Awa Kairangi.
She's due the day before the centre is set to shut, and so has since made other arrangements with her midwife and made peace with the fact her well-laid plans won't come to fruition.
When you've planned for something your whole pregnancy and things change at quite the last minute now, it just makes everything a little bit more difficult. And we try to be really cool and calm through the pregnancy because obviously stress doesn't help with that situation, but it does add an extra layer of things to think about and that we could really probably do without, to be honest.
Amy Taylor, a midwife based in the area, says almost all of her clients had planned to give birth at the centre, with most having unique and careful reasons for doing so.
Very personal stories around previous traumas or a mental health history, or they're of a particular ethnicity where they don't necessarily feel culturally safe within a hospital environment.
The centre opened to much fanfare in 2018. The 12-room complex, designed for low-risk births, appealed to many who didn't want a home birth but didn't feel comfortable in the hospital's maternity ward. Chloe Wright from the Wright Family Foundation, which set up and has been funding the centre so far, says she's bitterly disappointed the DHB hasn't come to the party.
It doesn't make any sense at all to dismiss a centre that's 4 minutes down the road and has given incredible support from amazing staff who can practice midwifery skills in the way that they're trained to practice them.
The DHB has always been upfront about the fact it wasn't going to put money in, but Ms. Wright says she thought it would change its mind.
I believed, in good faith and perhaps rather foolishly, that when they saw the difference it makes in families and mothers, that they would engage with us. So I took that chance, but I didn't really see it as a risk.
The DHB maintains there are a range of options for women in the Wellington region, which is why it's not in a position to fund Te Awa Kairangi. Its chief executive says funding the centre would divert money away from its core services and wouldn't result in good outcomes. However, those fighting for the centre say evidence shows the opposite, that primary birthing units such as Te Awa Kairangi minimise the need for ongoing healthcare and the costs in the long term end up lower. Nationals MP for Hutt South Chris Bishop says under a national government, maternity funding would follow the pregnant person and not just go straight to the DHB.
If women chose to use the birthing centre to give birth, that funding would follow them, and that would mean that the DHB would have essentially a pile of money following them that would allow it, as I understand it, to maintain its operations.
The centre will be mothballed on September the 23rd, meaning the doors will shut, but the equipment would all stay in place in the hopes one day wallets will open, and it can too.
It is 9 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. He muriaki ina pita pita kōrero. After the news at 6, vaccinated people in New South Wales get a prize, despite daily case numbers climbing above 1,000. Legendary Paralympian Sophie Pascoe, who has eased her way into medal contention in Tokyo after placing second in the 100-metre SB8 breaststroke heat. Pascoe is chasing her 10th gold medal as she competes in her 4th Paralympics. Watching on in lockdown as she raced today was her very proud nan, Yvonne Goodman, who joins me now. Hi Yvonne, what did you make of the race?
Oh, it was wonderful, Lisa. Actually, I saw it with all my family, all Sophie's family. My daughter Karen in Auckland got us all together on FaceTime, and there was about 8 or 9 of us, all the family together cheering her on. But oh my gosh, what a close race that was, wasn't it? It was so exciting.
Yeah, well, she was ahead for most of it. She was ahead for most of it, so you must have been on the edge of your seat.
Oh, we were, and we were shouting, go, 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 Sophie, and they were cheering, and it was so wonderful to see her race again. And, it's just unbelievable that Tokyo's come around and they're all there. It's so wonderful for them all, isn't it?
What do you think of her chances for a medal tonight?
Well, fingers crossed, knowing Sophie, she might have held back a wee bit, who knows? You wouldn't know with her. Her support team. But they're all good, and I know whatever happens, she'll be doing her very best for all of us, for her country and for herself and for all her friends and family and supporters.
Yvonne, do you still get a bit nervy watching her? Do you get a bit nervous?
Yes, and then we get excited when she's nearly there. But, it's going to be, I think it's going to be a wonderful night. It's going to be I think it's going to be a wonderful games.
Yeah, well, on that subject then, what are your predictions for how many medals she might bring home in total?
Well, that's very hard, isn't it? And I don't want to put her into a position that she's got to bring so many medals home to us. But hopefully 4 or 3. Who knows? Who knows? I mean, it's what happens on the day, isn't it? But I know she's in really good form. She's so happy. She's so happy. I've just had a text from her, and I said what a close race it was, and wishing her all the best. And she said, "Nan, I feel good. It felt good." So,
well, that's good news, Yvonne. That's great news.
Oh, there might be something behind that little message.
Well, it has been a
Who knows?
It has been a tough lead up, hasn't it? I mean, gosh, the world we're in at the moment is all a bit strange.
Yes, no, she's had it is, and she's not just Sophie, but a lot of the athletes. They've all had a very tough year, and Sophie has too. We've gone through quite a lot with her, and also she's got a wonderful partner who has supported her in all this, and I think through him it's got her to the games. And I think, we're also thankful to Rob for what he has done for Sophie. It's taken a lot of our shoulders because she was not in a good place, and he just came into her life at the right time. And I know he's going to be there for her when she comes home, and it'll be an exciting time for both of them. I know they'll be missing each other.
Yvonne, I understand it was a pretty special day all round. It's Sophie's mum's birthday, isn't it, today?
Yes, it is. Yes, it's her 60th birthday. And her daughter in Wakatani was going to come down with her little girl, who is nearly 2, and her partner. And they were all going to Willowbank today for the day. But, of course, it didn't happen, did it? But it will perhaps later. I don't know. Hopefully it will soon. We've just got to get through this now, haven't we, all together?
Yeah. Hey, and when Sophie finally gets home, what will the big celebration be? I hear you do a bit of a mean roast. Is that the truth?
Oh, yes, we all do. I don't do as much cooking now. I think we leave that to... Actually, it's her father now that does the roast dinners for the family. Gary is a wonderful roast cooker, and he is the one now that does the roast cooking. And I'm sure Gary will be putting on a leg of lamb or 2 legs of lamb for Sophie, and we'll all be together again. It'll be so wonderful.
Well, Yvonne, given your predictions, I reckon it needs to be at least 2 legs of lamb and a decent whack of spuds as well.
Yes, that's right. And her favourite dessert, mandarin mousse and pavlova.
Wonderful. That sounds like a fab...
We're all looking forward to tonight, and we'll be cheering her on, in our group.
Yeah, and a whole lot of other people will too, Yvonne. Thank you so much for sparing us some time this evening. That is Sophie Pascoe's nan, Yvonne Goodman, who's on the edge of her seat, been cheering today for the heats, and will be watching as Sophie races tonight. There's been relief for teenagers and principals with news the government has agreed to delay the start of NCEA and scholarship exams by 2 weeks. The ministry has told schools that due to the disruption to learning caused by the level 4 lockdown, exams will begin on November the 22nd. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
Teenagers in Auckland, Otorohanga and Canterbury contacted by RNZ agreed lockdown learning is not as good as learning in person, especially when they're preparing for exams. But they had differing views on the decision to delay exams by a fortnight.
I wasn't shocked because I was expecting something like that to come from NZQA, but I guess the decision is actually a great thing for our students because it gives us more preparation time.
I think it's going to be pretty helpful for other people if they are struggling with certain subjects.
I feel like it won't really make much of a difference, but a lot of my friends are really angry and frustrated by it.
Auckland schools are expecting to be in lockdown longer than schools in other regions. The principal of Whangaparaoa College, Steve McCracken, was quick to call for NCEA changes because of the region's lockdowns last year. He's happy the Qualifications Authority has changed the exam dates.
This is a really positive start in terms of allowing learners and the rest of the teaching staff as well to adapt and be flexible, because nothing actually replaces that face-to-face contact time between teachers and students.
Steve McCracken says he's expecting the government will also have to make other changes, such as giving bonus credits like it did last year.
For Auckland itself, it's the third time we've been in lockdown this school year, and it's taken us a huge impact on the learners and teachers alike. I think there's a definite need for it to be considered quite strongly, but I think it also depends upon how long we're actually going to stay at this alert level 4.
The principal of Carmel College in Auckland, Chris Allen, says students are getting less contact time with their teachers during lockdown, so the exam delay is helpful.
We've had to reduce the amount of teaching time that we have and reduce the amount of, virtual face-to-face that we have with our teachers and our students. And this gives the students some certainty about the fact that they know now that they will have an opportunity later on to hopefully get back to school and do some more study before they actually have to sit the externals.
She too is expecting further changes to ensure the teenagers most affected by the lockdown are not disadvantaged.
NZQA have actually said so far, and obviously they're indicating that should we be in level 3 or 4 for 4 weeks, they'll have the learning credits back and all of those sort of assistance to the students. That would be very helpful and lowers the stress level and helps their anxiety levels.
The Education Ministry has told schools it is working with a professional advisory group, so it will be ready to introduce any extra changes to NCEA that might be needed.
And on our interview with Sophie Pascoe's nan, who's been watching today, made my day. Beautiful, supportive grandmother, that listener says.
Ahiahi Marie, RNZ News at 6, ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. The government says decreasing numbers of exposure events in the latest outbreak show people are following lockdown rules. Of the more than 60 new community cases reported yesterday, only 3 new exposure events, places those individuals were while infectious, have emerged. The Prime Minister says this shows people are following the Alert Level 4 rules and breaking potential chains of transmission.
That tells us something really important, that people are following level 4 and that we're beginning to reach people who have become infected since lockdown began.
Jacinda Ardern says more than half of yesterday's cases were household contacts, which was to be expected due to the rate of household transmission. A testing station for COVID-19 has been set up today in Auckland for church members of 27 Assembly of God congregations that were connected to a cluster. A church spokesperson wants to challenge negative comments about the Pacifica church community's response to the outbreak. Jerome Mika says members have heeded the call to get tested.
That narrative also that they haven't cooperated. Let me say we're expecting around 900 to 1,000 people here today. There was only 500 at that church and we couldn't track it. So we're doing the conservative and giving everyone here today and tomorrow.
68 new COVID cases were reported today, bringing the total size of the outbreak to 277. A medical union says an email instructing Canterbury District Health Board staff to work on site is making workers anxious. An email seen by RNZ says all service managers are being told that rostered staff need to turn up to work. The email states the rationale is there are no COVID-19 cases in the South Island and a vaccine is available. The Association of Salaried Medical Specialists Executive Director Sarah Dalton says it's disappointing.
It's really frustrating. I think some of them just also feel quite anxious
about those kinds of instructions. And, it's really confusing when you're getting one message at the 1 o'clock updates, another message from your employer, and the way the message is being phrased is not particularly kind.
Sarah Dalton says health workers in other regions are facing similar issues. Aviation security staff will help police on the beat by doing foot patrols around Wellington supermarkets and petrol stations. The Police Commissioner, Andrew Costa, says 75 alert level related charges have now been laid since the country went into level 4. Most are the result of protests in the first few days and other intentional breaches. Nearly 200 formal warnings have been issued and over 900 infringement notices, most for not staying at home. The whānau of the late Ngāti Kahungunu Kaumatoa Des Ratima have placed their father's body in storage until level 4 restrictions lift. It's one of many ways families are dealing with tighter restrictions on funerals and tangihanga, which prevent them from being present at any stage of the funeral process. Ratima whānau spokesperson Bill Gray says it's an extremely difficult time.
The family decided to put theirs on ice for 14 days. After 14 days, we would review it, but I guess it doesn't stop us from using Zoom to remember those wonderful moments in time we spent with this honourable man.
The head of Air New Zealand doesn't see any likelihood of a return to normal international travel for another couple of years. The airline has reported a large full-year operating loss of $440 million because of COVID-19. Chief Executive Greg Foran backs the development of a COVID travel and vaccine passport, but thinks it is still some way away.
Hopefully what we see through all of next calendar year is refinement of those particular strategies and better testing regimes, etc. And, 2023 we can start to actually stretch our legs and spread our wings.
Greg Foran says layoffs will be avoided if the lockdown lasts a few weeks, but the airline has applied for the wage subsidy. It's 6:04. A group of residents opposed to Wellington's airport expansion plans are disappointed an independent commissioner has given the billion-dollar project the green light. The group, Guardians of the Bays, says ratepayers will be stuck paying for a giant white elephant, which will also add massively to greenhouse gas emissions. The group is considering its options while it waits for the airport's decision. And finally, a first-time mum who had planned on using a birthing centre, which has since announced it will close, says it's an extra stress she could do without. Te Awa Kairangi Birth Centre in Lower Hutt, which is run by a charity, will close next month due to lack of funding. Hannah Dollery is due to give birth the day before the centre closes.
And we try to be really cool and calm through the pregnancy because obviously stress doesn't help with things to think about and that we could really probably do without, to be honest.
The District Health Board says it won't fund the centre because there are already enough options in the Wellington region. Moving now into sport, Captain Sam Whitelock, first five Richie Mo'unga and halfback Aaron Smith have been left out of the All Blacks travelling squad for next week's Rugby Championship test against Australia in Perth, with the players' partners all expecting babies. The excused trio may join up with the squad for the rest of the Rugby Championship, which will be played in Queensland State due to COVID-19 travel restrictions. Bowden Barrett is the only specialist first five left, with coach Ian Foster saying Damien McKenzie will deputise in the number 10 jersey.
We've always said Damien's our third 10, so we've definitely taken 2 10s. When we look at it, we're hopeful that Richie can get over sooner than later. And so in the meantime, it's one of those strong dilemmas, where do you bring over someone else and once they come on the plane, they're with us for 15 weeks without maybe a lot of likelihood of getting a lot of rugby.
A notable omission from the squad is loose forward Shannon Frizzell, who was recently offered diversion on assault charges. Swimmer Sophie Pascoe will chase her first gold medal of the of the Tokyo Paralympics, when she competes in the final of the 100-metre breaststroke SB8 category later tonight. Pascoe posted the second quickest time in the heats. She won silver in the event at the 2012 Games in London. And finally, all-white striker Chris Wood has helped Burnley advance to the third round of English football's League Cup, slotting one of his side's goals in a 4-3 penalty shootout win over Newcastle. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, our astronomer Alan Gilmore has details of comet Bernardinelli Bernstein, one of the biggest ever spotted. Well, it would be with a name like that, but alas, not likely to be anything more than a smudge to the naked eye. That'll go nicely with our changing world search for planets beyond the solar system. Lien Huang is on the line from Vietnam, and Auckland Library will explain why it's doing away with overdue fines. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, still the right time for RNZ National.
Te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Rāmere Friday. Northland, also Taranaki, partly cloudy tonight with the odd shower about North Taranaki. Periods of rain tomorrow, becoming heavier at times. For Auckland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the central high country, mostly cloudy, scattered showers tomorrow, turning to rain in the afternoon or evening. For Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine tonight, scattered rain in Wairarapa tomorrow and high cloud elsewhere, with patchy late rain in Hawke's Bay. For Kapiti and Wellington, cloudy periods and 1 or 2 showers tonight, periods of rain tomorrow. For Buller, Nelson and Marlborough, showers turning to rain this evening with heavy falls. For Canterbury, Otago and Southland, cloud increasing and rain spreading north tonight, mostly cloudy with rain at times tomorrow. For Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain becoming heavier at times. And for the Chatham Islands, fine spells today, occasional rain or showers tomorrow. That concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Rāmere Friday. The time is now 8 minutes past 6.
Kia ora rā eho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A dedicated testing centre for the largest sub-cluster of this outbreak opened today. More than 100 cases trace back to the Samoan Assembly of God Church in Mangere. The new testing station ensures the community can be tested near where they live and processing can be prioritised. RNZ Pacific's Sella Jane Hopgood reports.
The Manukau Magpies Rugby League and Sports Club now seeing teamwork of a different kind. 27 Samoan Assembly of God congregations in Auckland uniting to get tested for COVID-19. Spokesperson Jerome Mika says they're expecting about 900 to 1,000 people today.
The church has been fully cooperative and have tried to also ensure that everyone was tested, but also we needed to care for our church community. A lot of them have been waiting here since 8:30 this morning.
Organised through Zoom video conferencing meetings, AOG church leaders, together with South Seas Healthcare and the Cause Collective, were able to set up today's testing station, which will also run tomorrow. It's only for the church community and not for the general public. It has been an emotional time for some, with organiser Rebecca Toleafoa worked tirelessly to rally up all the close contacts.
We have cooperated from day one as worshipping on the 15th of August on Sunday, not knowing that in the church amongst the congregation there was an act. We were there just to worship and get together. But my heart goes out to everybody that's got the positive.
And the Samoan AOG congregations in Auckland have been cooperative. Jerome Mika says despite the racist remarks the Samoan community have endured in the past week, they've turned up in droves.
You would hope that, Aotearoa is a mature society where there is only a minority that have that opinion. But I think for us, our core focus is the care for the church community, but also to get everyone tested and to keep Aotearoa safe.
He says the community are willing to help stamp out the virus.
People weren't resistant to get tested, and a lot of our church community have actually tested once or twice, but they've come back to ensure that there isn't any question that everyone has tested.
Northern Region Health Coordination Centre lead and Counties Manukau Health CEO Fepoliai Maji Apa says focusing on a particular cluster to get tested is not an unusual approach.
What that does is it makes it actually easier for us to make sure that the tests that come from that cluster are prioritised when we go through the lab processing system. So it's actually something that we do normally.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern acknowledges the hard work and commitment to better support the Pasifika community during this outbreak.
If someone from the community is telling us that we need to improve communications, then I take them at their word on that. Obviously, there are things that we can do to improve there. I know there's been a lot of work, particularly with some of our fantastic Pacific providers who are doing a lot of work to help improve some of the welfare response.
Tāmaki Makaurau health authorities say this week there's been record-breaking numbers getting COVID-19 tests. Since the move to Alert Level 4, more than 150,000 community tests have been registered, making it Metro Auckland's biggest week ever for testing. Of these, almost 28,000 tests have been taken by communities who identify as one of 8 Pacific ethnicities. This is the highest rate of testing per population of any group.
Declining an emergency MIQ spot to a New Zealander with a high-risk pregnancy stranded in the United States without medical insurance is a human rights breach, according to the woman's lawyer. Bergen Graham had been living with her husband in his home country of El Salvador when she discovered she was pregnant and had a condition that could complicate her pregnancy. The couple tried but failed to get MIQ spots through the booking system and have since made 6 emergency applications that have all been declined. With Bergen Graham's visa about to expire in El Salvador, the couple was forced to head to America to wait it out. But by the time the baby is due, she will be an overstayer there. Joining me now is her lawyer, Frances Joychild. Frances, what's wrong with this situation?
Well, I think there is something very wrong with how places in MIQ are being allocated. People who are fighting fit in black jerseys with silver ferns are able to come and go to New Zealand. Hundreds of civil servants are able to go on overseas trade expos and they have places booked to return. But New Zealand is refusing its borders to a New Zealand citizen who is in her 3rd trimester of pregnancy, has a high-risk pregnancy, and has 3 doctors' letters now telling the government and MIQ that she must return to New Zealand for treatment for her high-risk issues. It's just absolutely appalling and shocking that she is being turned down. She is absolutely stateless at the moment, no right to any medical treatment, no visa for anywhere else, and she cannot get into her own country.
Frances, since we ran that interview with her, some people have got in touch to say, well, her complication with her pregnancy is not that serious.
Well, I mean, it's any person, as her second doctor said, any woman who is in a country without medical insurance, such as the United States doesn't have any universal health care, and who is needing to come home, has a very high reason to come home. There are always risks with pregnancy anyway. And her 3 medical people, 1 specialist, two other doctors, one is a family doctor who works in this area, have all said she needs to be treated. She needs to be treated in New Zealand and she needs to go home. The first doctor said immediately to her home country. The others have used similar words.
So what rules do you think are being broken by the New Zealand government or ministries by turning her down?
Well, look, New Zealand's got obligations under the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act. Every New Zealand citizen has the right to enter New Zealand. Now, the government can place limitations on rights, but they have to be rational, reasonable and proportionate. And it's accepted that the pandemic's a national emergency, so some waiting at borders might be acceptable. However, what's irrational here is that you have people going overseas for all sorts of reasons that the government considers important, and it is turning down its own citizens who are in crisis situations, not just her but her unborn child overseas. So I would say there is something extremely wrong with how the officials and the government directing the officials are balancing the allocation of rooms in MIQ. So it looks like there is no category at all for hardship or for crisis, personal crisis. They're just, if you can fit in because someone else who they've approved hasn't got there, then that's all good. It's almost impossible to get a place through keeping on going through the normal system.
What options are left then, Frances? Is this heading to court?
Well, sadly, that is the only option that appears left, which is an appalling indictment on this country and its humanitarian approach to its own citizens. And I should say I'm contacted every day by someone overseas in a terribly difficult situation needing to come home. But I think Bergen, to me, is the worst because she's in such a high-risk situation so far on in her pregnancy. She has had 3 doctor's letters. And when the MIQ told her today that she does not meet the criteria, in my view, they are dancing on the head of a pin with their statement saying that they said, well, she hasn't proved that she needs to travel to New Zealand urgently. They're just toying with her, playing with words, and it's callous and cruel and frankly unbelievable.
Frances, what is her personal responsibility here? I mean, she left New Zealand during a pandemic to live with her husband in El Salvador. So she made a conscious decision to leave in what was very difficult times.
It was only a short-term visit. Her husband has been, and that's because they are married, and her husband has been trying to get to New Zealand for some time, but New Zealand doesn't take kindly to people from South America. So that has required her to go over and spend some of the year with him. Now, she unexpectedly fell pregnant. We all know that pregnancy is not always planned. It happens to women all over the world all the time, and it creates a large number of issues that come with it. We've got a responsibility to her unborn child as well as her. At the moment, she's facing giving birth in the States when she's an alien and has no access to health care. How can New Zealand do this to its own citizens?
Frances, really appreciate your time this evening. That is Frances Joychild, who's the lawyer for Bergen Graham, who is desperate to get a spot in MIQ and return home to have her baby here in New Zealand. It is 19 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. 3 All Blacks are missing the rugby championship so they can be home for the births of their children. Sam Whitelock, Aaron Smith and Richie Mo'unga all have babies due in the coming weeks. The rest of the All Blacks fly out for Perth this evening for the final Bledisloe Cup test next weekend. After a tense few weeks between New Zealand rugby and its Australian counterparts, Foster isn't expecting a red carpet welcome in Western Australia.
There might be a little bit of explaining to do in some ways, but we're really confident in the decisions that have been made on our side of the Tasman, and hopefully they will resort to the normal level of hostility that you'd normally get between a Wallabies and an All Black game.
After their games in Australia, the All Blacks then go to the US and Europe for the end-of-year tour. They don't have MIQ spots booked until November 23rd and will be away for more than 12 weeks. They only have a limited number of places too, meaning if the injury toll mounts, they could find themselves in a tricky position.
There's not a lot of wriggle room in that. For example, if we end up with 5 or 6 injuries of players who actually couldn't play anymore on the tour, then we're going to get stretched in terms of that number.
All Blacks coach Ian Foster. Some Canterbury health staff are being told they can't work from home. Their rationale, there are no COVID-19 cases in the South Island and vaccination is available. And a union says other DHBs are making similar demands. Tess Brunton has more.
The emailed message is clear. All staff who are rostered to work need to work on site. There is no working from home. That directive was sent to staff in at least one Canterbury DHB department before making its way into Sarah Dalton's inbox. She's the Executive Director at the Association of Salaried Medical Specialists.
It's really frustrating. I think some of them just also feel quite anxious about those kinds of instructions, and it's really confusing when you're getting one message at the 1 o'clock updates, another message from your employer, and the way the message is being phrased is not particularly kind.
She says health workers in other regions are facing similar issues.
And it's happening in a number of hospitals around the country where not only are staff being required to be present at work, but the tasks they're being required to do don't relate directly to acute services, patient care, or basically they're being asked to do things that could be done at any time and aren't strictly part of their role. So we do think it's really important that there is clinically led decision making through the lockdown rather than bureaucratic kind of command and control.
Twice a week, Sarah Dalton, the Ministry of Health, DHBs and other unions meet to iron out more consistent advice for DHBs and their staff.
It's a real struggle. Even once the advice is agreed and put out, we endlessly find examples where that national agreed advice isn't being adhered to either by a whole of the DHB or particular services within various DHBs. And I guess that's partly the nature of a system where you've got 20 different DHBs doing their thing. So, maybe under Health NZ that's going to change. I don't know.
Canterbury DHB says the note was sent to a small group of staff and incorrectly interpreted current advice, which has since been corrected. The DHB says there is no directive that all staff have to come to work, and some staff who can work from home and have their manager's permission are able to work remotely. Under Alert Level 4, the DHB says some clinical staff are carrying out phone or video consultations, but work in the office so they've got access to files and diagnostic information.
Time is quickly running out for anyone desperate to escape Afghanistan. MFAT says its ability to help individuals on the ground is very limited and no new requests for visas are being accepted. Andrew McRae reports.
Highly uncertain, fragile and rapidly changing is the best description of the situation in Kabul. MFAT says a number of people have been brought home from Afghanistan and others are in transit. But it's unlikely New Zealand will be able to help everyone it's seeking to evacuate. Karuda Azizi from the Afghan Association says those left behind wanting to get away have few options left other than trying to get across the border into one of 5 neighbouring countries such as Pakistan. He says it will be extremely dangerous.
The mentality of the Afghans or the Taliban is different. So, for example, in Kabul, they might be made, like, let's just say, one type of mentality where they're like, oh, you're a New Zealand citizen, okay. But then if you go to another town, they may say, oh, you're a New Zealand citizen, let me grab you. Like, you can never tell, and it can be from let them go to hold them down kind of thing. So it's obviously a massive risk that they're going to take.
Foreign Affairs Minister Nanaia Mahuta isn't speaking with media, but National's Jerry Brownlee is. He says it's important everything possible is done to get people with connections to this country out of Afghanistan.
Clearly, we don't have a capacity to mount a military operation into Afghanistan to recover people. If the United States can't do it, then there's absolutely no chance that we can. It is just an awful situation. I think we've got to keep on trying to ensure that Afghanistan doesn't become a totally isolated and rogue state.
Golriz Garaman from the Greens says many people at risk from the Taliban have made their own way out and are now refugees in neighbouring countries. She says New Zealand should assist them and bring them to this country as part of a special refugee quota.
This is one of those moments in global history where something catastrophic is happening to people. And to say that somebody has made it just over the border to Pakistan or someone's made it to Kabul airport and there's no one giving them a visa, that New Zealand won't allow them to come to safety here, even leaving aside the logistics, even assuming that they can sort that out or we can assist with sorting it out, that's just heartbreaking.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says it was always known that the window of opportunity to get people out of Kabul was going to be short.
No one has gone in with the intention of leaving anyone behind, but the reality of the situation has been extraordinarily difficult.
It's been reported that the Taliban have made a commitment to the United States for Western citizens and at-risk Afghans to leave the country after the end of the month deadline. Otago University Professor of International Relations Robert Patman says this can't be taken too seriously. He believes trying to open dialogue with the Taliban anytime soon is premature.
It's often, I think, underestimated. We have a huge stake in what's called international rules-based order, and the Taliban doesn't sit very comfortably with that. And already there are signs that although it indicated that it was a mellower form of the Taliban that had reappeared in 2021 than the one that disappeared in 2001, there seems to be a gap between their rhetoric and what they're actually doing on the ground.
In 2 weeks' time, those fully vaccinated will have more freedom in New South Wales. The announcement of the easing of restrictions comes despite the state recording its highest ever daily number of COVID cases, more than 1,000. World Watch's Paulina Lau reports.
There's a light at the end of the tunnel in New South Wales, but only for some.
Families, a household, will now be able to go out for an hour of recreation on top of the hour of exercise. So a family will be able to sit in the park so long as the adults are vaccinated.
The key message being the adults have to be fully vaccinated and be able to show proof. The relaxing of these rules will begin in 2 weeks on September the 13th. There's also a difference depending on where you live.
For the rest of Greater Sydney and for the regions, 5 people will now be able to gather outdoors so long as all adults are vaccinated. That 5 can include children, but obviously if it's 5 adults, all of them will need to be vaccinated. So it means that if you have friends or relatives within your LGA or within the 5 kilometres, you will be able to congregate together in an outdoor gathering.
Currently, only gatherings of 2 from different households is allowed. Despite record infections, with more than 1,000 today setting both a state and nationwide daily record, New South Wales is pushing ahead. But while those fully vaccinated will enjoy new freedoms, regional New South Wales will stay in lockdown until September the 10th over fears of growing cases. The lockdown was set to end this weekend. After being accused of a vaccine stroll-out, Prime Minister Scott Morrison is marking vaccination milestones and marching ahead with the federal government's plan to open up the country.
Yesterday, 335,420 of the COVID-19 vaccine were administered here in Australia. Another record day. Records that give us the hope that the national plan can take us to where we want to be.
New South Wales is in support of the federal government's plan. Premier Gladys Berejiklian says that 70% figure could come earlier than expected, calling on people to be prepared.
But we do say that the condition of you participating in what will be reopening is on you being vaccinated. Because when you start opening at 70%, there are certain activities only vaccinated people can do. Because we know that whilst a certain proportion of the population is unvaccinated, that poses a risk to too many people. So for that reason, we're asking industry to dust off their COVID safety plans, get the QR codes in check, and we're also working on an app in New South Wales that will allow you to sign into a venue, but also have proof of your vax all in one.
The Premier will announce the plan for schools tomorrow and how they can return safely after lockdown at the end of September.
That's all we've got time for. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō. First up, 5 a.m. tomorrow, we'll have Auckland's home show tell them, that they'll be asking the government for a level 2 exemption so the event can definitely go ahead in November after the 3rd postponement in a year. Kia pai tōpō, have a great night. We'll be back tomorrow. It'll be a big day. Expecting that announcement.
Kia ora tātou, RNZ News headlines, ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. The government says people are following lockdown rules and is pointing to fewer exposure events as evidence. Only 3 new exposures, places those individuals were while infectious, have emerged in the last day. A New Zealander with a high-risk pregnancy is stranded in the United States after 6 failed attempts to get an emergency MIQ spot. Her lawyer says it's a breach of human rights. An Afghan man living here says anyone still wanting to flee Afghanistan now has to risk crossing the border into one of 5 countries. An international airlift ends soon. Those stories and more, including weather, in our next news at 7.
This lockdown, let